Hey, what's happening everybody? This is Jon Denton and I'm going to be reviewing GoNNER, which has just come out on the eShop on Nintendo Switch. Now before I start, as always, if you enjoyed the video and enjoy the review, remember to subscribe. Okay, GoNNER is an IGF award-winning sort of platformer roguelike shooter, developed by Art in Heart and published by Raw Fury, not names that are necessarily household names, but nonetheless. There's a degree of polish here and some good ideas and some well-borrowed ideas. So yes, you play as a funny little chap called Ick, basically a guy who can lose his head and different parts of his body. And he is going through 4 different stages in the classic kind of roguelike format. If you played Spelunky, if you played something like Rogue Legacy, you'll know what to expect here. What makes this game different is that it has a very unique art style, as you can tell just by watching the video. Everything drawn in a slightly felt tip, but not very stylish. I wouldn't exactly know what you'd call that art style, but extremely stylish, and the levels are drawn in around you, but fundamentally you're just moving through the stages and trying to shoot all the enemies. Now at first I found this pretty difficult because it has a strange control system for something that should be so simple. There's a jump, there's a shoot, and there's a sort of action button, which at the beginning of the game is a reload, and later on as you get new abilities and change things around, it changes its function. But weirdly, the jump button is on the A button, which you may know is the circle button on PlayStation, and then the action button is below that, and so it almost feels backwards to how almost any game like this would control, and it can be very confusing at first. I soon found out that you can also shoot using the right trigger, which does make things a little easier, but still a strange control system. It took me a while to get used to, but regardless, you do get used to it soon enough. And the game actually handles quite nicely. Like I said, it is all about shooting these red enemies that are through the levels, and you're trying to get through the small screens in each stage, sort of scrolling screens, get past a shop, and then get to a boss. There are various secrets along the way, there's different characters, but that's the main thrust of the game, and then you're moving through the various worlds. We've seen it before, this is sort of a standard roguelike structure, but GoNNER does the important things that a good roguelike needs to do, namely that the levels have kind of feeling of design to them despite being randomly generated, but more importantly than that, there is a sense of surprise in the secrets that you find. There's some interesting stuff going on, and it clearly borrows not only from Spelunky. It doesn't really play like Spelunky, but it definitely has that kind of structure to it, an idea of learning, and that the idea, despite the game being extremely difficult, which it is, it does kind of purport to be fair. You know, you always know why you die, etc. But it also borrows stuff from Luftrausers. You can see that there's some Vlambeer influence in the way that the screen shake, which is actually an option in the menu, is very much a part of the game. And the way GoNNER works in terms of the little loadouts that Ick can have, it is reminiscent of Luftrausers in the fact that you can combine the various things that you find along your journey, and then every time you start another run you can choose any of those again. So there are different heads. The standard head gives you 5 hearts, then soon you find a bigger head which only gives you 3 hearts, but when you die, by the way, when you die everything falls apart, so you have to kind of collect your various parts again, and if you get touched again in that state you're dead, kind of like Sonic the Hedgehog when you lose your rings, or almost like Dark Souls, we have to go back and find stuff that is literally right there next to you. The big head, for example, basically keeps you all together, so even though you've got less hearts you're less likely to die, and I think most people will probably stick with that one. And then you find different weapons, shotgun, lasers, stuff like that, and there's different loadouts, so you go in finding a way to play the game that you like. And while you're just shooting these red enemies, you can see in the top right of the screen there's a set of skulls that every time you shoot an enemy, one is crossed off, and the idea is that even though it's a difficult game and you might be encouraged in some ways to be defensive and just pick enemies off one by one, you need those skulls are a combo timer basically, and every time you hit 5, you cross 5 off, the game drops a glyph, a kind of purple glyph, into the environment which you collect. Now these glyphs have multiple uses, and one of the beautiful things about any roguelike, and sort of one of the more interesting things about GoNNER, is discovery. So I'm not going to exactly explain what the glyphs do, but they have multiple uses and they're very important basically. So make sure you're hitting those combos if you do play the game, and make sure you're collecting glyphs because they're very, very important in terms of progression, in terms of score. That's all I'll say, because it's fun to discover this stuff yourself, although the game is, you know, is extremely esoteric and it doesn't explain anything. So I would recommend potentially googling a little guide just to give you an overview of what the game is. If you're sort of kind of struggling for what to do, because beyond shooting, you may miss out on some of the key mechanics to actually make the game more interesting than it might seem. At its best, it certainly feels very nice. Different weapons have different kickback, and the use of HD rumble when playing Switch in handheld mode is really admirable. There's a rumble every time you hit an enemy and when you let the guns off. That feels really good. It's slightly diminished, as always, on the Pro Controller, but the game plays fine on the big screen. But I really think handheld, something like this, is the way forward, and clearly with it only being a game that was out on Steam last year and now just on Switch and no other consoles, it's clear that the Switch is really already becoming a key platform for indie developers, especially of indie games like this, and it's definitely a good fit. I guess on the downside to GoNNER, it does ramp up the difficulty very quickly, and it perhaps demands a little bit more from the player and from its own control system than perhaps it's capable of. With a game that requires this level of dexterity and moving between very small spaces between enemies and shooting exactly when you need to, I feel like the jump is maybe ever so slightly floaty. The fact that when you slide down the walls, you can sort of jump up and slide down walls like in Super Meat Boy, it turns your character around, so in split seconds you may suddenly realise you're facing the wrong way and lose a hit, which in a game like this, every single heart that you have is crucial. Every single hit that you take can impact how far you get, to which stage you get, how deep you get into the game. Eventually you're trying to get through all 4 stages and face the final boss. It's going to be extremely difficult for most people to get there, as is often the way with this style of game, but it is rewarding to progress. But for example, at the end of the first stage you find a kind of boss room with these 3 floating heads and a bunch of sort of random enemies strewn in there as well, and it can be extremely difficult to navigate while it's obvious what to do. You sort of shoot these flying heads as they come in to slow them down and finish them off. You're having to navigate so much, and the controls don't quite have that kind of Mario, Super Meat Boy level of perfection to them. They're not bad, they're not awful, we're not talking about Little Big Planet here, but I just don't think it quite has that level of precision that it perhaps needs to really elevate it to the top of this class and the top of the sort of platform shooter class. And as such, it can prove a little frustrating because you are being kicked back to the beginning of the game every single time. And while it is true when you complete one stage, you can visit your big whale friend called Sally and get your hearts back and sort of start anew, you will be starting at the beginning of the game so often that it does kind of cry out for a Spelunky type system where you can skip a level and sort of start the second stage, start the third stage. That would kind of be welcome, but to be honest, I mean, that may be in the game. I certainly didn't find it, so if it is, I do apologise to everybody involved. But starting again over and over again and having to take on that boss every single time, it can be a little frustrating. So I do think GoNNER is a fine addition to the eShop. I do think that it does a lot of nice things. It certainly feels nice in the hands. The gun kickback, the style of the game is excellent. Even the music, which initially sounded a bit nondescript and kind of nothing, really started to grow on me after a short time. And you have to give sort of Art by Heart a lot of credit for, you know, creating a stylish and fairly unique game, although it's clear it wears its influences on its sleeves. So overall, a good game to probably tide you over in the gap between ARMS and Splatoon 2 if you're somebody who's hitting all the major releases on Switch, or just another great example. Great's not the right word. Another good example of the Nintendo Switch as a great platform for indie games and a great place for indie games to kind of shine and get some space and breathing room. If it's released on PlayStation 4, Xbox One, it's likely that it would just kind of disappear into the back end of the store and nobody really noticed it, and I think that's probably what happened on Steam. So at least on Switch, with a relatively small amount of games on the eShop, hopefully it will find itself an audience. It's definitely a very decent game. I can imagine with some more tweaks and patches it could be a very, very good game. At its best, when you are negotiating very small spaces full of enemies and you're taking them out and you're picking up glyphs and you're racking up combos, it does feel really nice. So yeah, a lot to like in GoNNER. Not one of the true pinnacles of the roguelike genre. It's not on the same level as a Spelunky, as a Luftrausers, as a Nuclear Throne, as a Binding of Isaac, another game that it has it's more than its fair share of nods to. But still, yeah, thoroughly decent stuff, admirable and enjoyable stuff, and will definitely tide you over throughout the summer. So a sort of recommendation if you enjoy this type of game, a recommendation if you're looking for something on Switch. It's a little bit different, a little bit unusual, but not necessarily an absolutely essential title. Let me know what you think if you play GoNNER on PC. Let me know what you think if you play GoNNER on Switch, if it's something you're interested in. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Like I said, if you enjoyed the video, if you enjoyed the review, if you enjoy the idea of a channel that talks about games like this but also has fun with them, basically a channel that's capturing, or looking to anyway, the spirit of games magazines. That's my background. I've been working as a professional in the games industry, writing for every publication under the sun for the past 12 years and trying to recapture that in a YouTube channel. Okay, so my name is Jon Denton. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you on the next video. Peace!